Another area where the scientific evidence supports the Bible is related to geology. When we look at the rocks of the earth, we see thousands of feet of sedimentary rock layers on all continents of the world containing millions of fossils. The deepest layers have marine fossils like trilobites and mollusks, and then the higher layers have fossils of land-dwelling animals. But interestingly, those fossils are typically mixed together with fossils of marine animals like fish. What's the best explanation for this evidence? The secular explanation is slow, gradual processes over millions of years using the concept of uniformitarianism, which is the assumption that all geological features can be explained using the same processes we see around us today. Thus, for the Grand Canyon, they would say that the sea level slowly rose and fell many times over millions of years, depositing fossils along the way. Then the Colorado slowly cut down through the same channel over those millions of years, while the Colorado Plateau and Kaibab Upwarp slowly rose at precisely the right rate to allow the river to keep cutting its channel millimeter by millimeter over the centuries. By contrast, the Bible implies that most of the worldwide geological features and layers and fossils that we see were created during just 1 year in the global flood, with a huge amount of water that sometimes flowed at high speeds, along with huge earthquakes, supervolcano eruptions, catastrophic plate tectonic movement that split the continents apart and created a new ocean floor, high mountain ranges created quickly as continental plates crashed into each other, enormous tsunamis, meteorite impacts, and so on. So there are two paradigms, a lot of water in a little time, or a little water in a lot of time. In the 18th and 19th centuries, geologists such as James Hutton and Charles Lyell popularized the idea of uniformitarianism, that all modern-day geological processes can be explained by processes we see happening around us today. Their view became very prevalent through the scientific establishment. However, more and more evidence has accumulated in recent years that doesn't fit the slow and gradual view. For example, in Montana, Wyoming, Washington, and Oregon, there's evidence that there used to be a large lake fed by meltwater from glaciers at the end of the Ice Age, the most recent Ice Age. This was called Lake Missoula. It was bounded on one end by an ice dam, and the lake was about 2,000 feet deep at that place. In 1923, a scientist named J. Harlan Bretz published evidence that the channeled scablands in Washington were cut by unprecedented huge floods rather than by regular, slow, gradual erosion from rain and rivers. However, for the next 40 years, scientists refused to accept this view because it didn't fit their idea of slow, gradual, uniformitarian geology. Eventually, in the 1960s, scientists admitted that there had been a huge flood, or perhaps multiple floods, with water up to 600 feet deep, passing over what is now the city of Spokane, moving 60 miles per hour, and eroding up to 50 cubic miles of rock. That same flood also deposited new layers of rock up to 100 feet thick, as seen in this photo of Burlingame Canyon, and it cut new canyons like this 500-foot deep Palouse Canyon, and it also cut the Shoshone Water Gap. Apparently, the early part of the flood had wide sheet currents which planed the tops of the rocks so that everything was very flat. And then later, when the water levels and speeds had dropped, some channels began to appear, and the rest of the water cut the channels deeper, producing features like this 900-foot-tall steamboat rock shown here. This flood happened after the global flood of Noah, but it was much smaller than Noah's flood, but it shows the types of geological effects that a large flood could cause. Another event which helped to change people's perspective on the rock layers was the 1980 eruption of Mount Saint Helens. On May 18th, an earthquake triggered a landslide. Immediately afterward, the side of the volcano exploded catastrophically, sending a hot cloud of gas and ash rushing down the side of the mountain at 600 miles per hour and more than 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This knocked down all the trees in its path, more than 10 miles distance, depending on which angle you're looking at. That eruption laid down in just 3 hours more than 25 feet of volcanic ash in some areas, which later hardened into rock. The resulting rock layers often showed fine laminations and layers, as the pyroclastic moving particles had automatically separated themselves by size and weight. There were also other connected events which happened afterwards, such as a 600-foot wave triggered by the landslide that washed thousands of broken trees back into the nearby lake, Spirit Lake, where they formed a floating log mat. And there were canyons cut by the lake dam breach flooding events in the years afterward, including a canyon that was 140 feet deep and was cut in one single day. When you look at a canyon like this, with a river flowing through it, you might think that the sediment had built up over millions of years and the river had slowly carved the canyon, except we know from the records of Mount Saint Helens that it didn't. This canyon was cut in a very short time by a flood after the ash was deposited quickly by a volcanic eruption. This Mount Saint Helens eruption demonstrated that geological catastrophe can produce in hours and days geologic features previously believed to have taken millions of years. And if we see that just one little volcano and a little lake could make these features so quickly, how much more could huge supervolcanoes like Yellowstone and Toba and La Garita and so on do? And if the small floods of Missoula and Mount St. Helens Spirit Lake could carve the massive canyons, it makes sense that a global flood could carve all the larger geological features we see, like the Grand Canyon and others. Interestingly, some of the dacite lava rocks from the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption were dated by secular scientists using potassium-argon radioisotope dating, and they showed an age of somewhere between 350,000 years to 2.8 million years. This shows that the assumptions used by radioisotope dating can often be misleading and incorrect. You can look at these supplemental links for much more information about radioisotope dating. Another interesting observation is that rock layers are often bent without cracking, showing that they were still soft when bent, so they were all laid down together. Here's a photo of some rock layers in Pennsylvania. What about fossils? The fossil evidence strongly supports the global flood model. Think about how fossils form. The animal actually has to be buried quickly with mud or sand underwater, otherwise it will rot and fall apart and decay and never get fossilized. If you go out in your front yard and you put a fish or a chicken there, do you think it will fossilize slowly over millions of years, while millimeters of sediment build up slowly around it? Of course not. It will rot long before layers of dirt cover it up. Even at the bottom of an ocean or lake, there are still scavengers and bacteria that would eat the carcass. So the fact that we have rock layers with millions of fossils show lots of catastrophic burial by flooding on the continents in the past. Further, we see land and sea animals buried together in many places, and oftentimes they're jumbled together, such as hundreds of dinosaurs buried together in the same spot. Some fossils even have soft, stretchy tissue still, which have parts inside them that have not been permineralized or fossilized. Scientists have even found muscle cells, blood cells, and blood vessels inside with original proteins. This preservation of soft tissue is extremely surprising if the fossils are as old as the secular evolutionists claim they are, namely millions of years old. But according to the Bible, they're probably only about 4,000 or 5,000 years old, and that makes much more sense. Many fossils also show evidence of being buried quickly, such as several ichthyosaurs fossilized in the process of giving birth, and fish in the process of eating other fish, and so on. Some fossil trees are seen to have grown through many layers of rock, and even though the normal rate of soil accumulation is millimeters per century, it's obvious that it couldn't have been growing that slowly. It would have taken 100,000 years to bury these trees from Joggins in Nova Scotia at normal rates, and you expect to see some changes in the trunk size over time, if it even survived that long. Instead, the surrounding layers of mud must have been deposited quickly and then turned into rock later, and the tree got fossilized as there was sufficient mineralized water around it. These are called polystrate fossils. There are other evidence or examples from Yellowstone. For example, in this picture, these are said to be remnants of forests that grew one after another. But there's evidence that they were all buried as part of the same event because their roots are broken off and they lack layers of soil. Instead, they're probably remnants of a log mat after a flood. You can see the supplemental links for more details about this. Another evidence of the global flood is the megasequences. A sequence of rock layers is a set of layers bounded above and below by erosional or non-depositional surfaces, typically laid down by a single flood event, starting at the bottom with large rocks and going up to smaller rocks, sandstone, shale, and then finally carbonate at the top as the water loses energy and dumps its sediment. Megasequences are huge sequences that are found across whole continents that are often hundreds or even thousands of feet thick. The lowest one is the Sauk megasequence, and then the Tippecanoe, etc. There are at least 5 megasequences that cover the entire continent of North America and similar in other continents. You can see many of them in the Grand Canyon. So these rock layers that are 1,000 feet thick but stretch flat across thousands of miles with almost no erosion at the boundaries, like an enormous pancake, The existence of these megasequences is strong evidence for a global flood. If, as on the secular model, these megasequences had been made by 40 million years of slow erosion and deposition with modern geological processes, as the sea levels gradually increased and then decreased many times up and down, then we would see evidence of that erosion, like canyons and valleys, and bioturbation, which refers to animals burrowing down and tree roots and so on. Instead, we see flat layers without bioturbation or erosion. There's also evidence at the bottom of the Sauk Megasequence of very high-speed floodwaters, like huge boulders ripped from the underlying quartz rocks. See the links in the supplement for more. There's a lot more evidence that you can look at regarding how these layers were made underwater, such as the angle of the cross-bedded regions of sandstone, the nautiloid fossil layer, the water gaps and wind gaps, and evidence for catastrophic plate tectonics and so on. So see the links in the supplement for more details. The global flood also fits with human history and archaeology. Many tribes of people have legends and folklore describing the early days of humanity, and almost all of these include a legend about a huge flood. Some of them talk about a small number of humans surviving in a boat, some talk about the boat containing pairs of animals, and so on. This makes sense if cultures had passed down some of these stories from oral tradition. These non-biblical stories are typically fragmented and less coherent than the biblical story and contain unrealistic details. For example, the Gilgamesh epic saying that the ark was a cube in shape, which would not be a stable boat shape, unlike the biblical account. The population growth rates also fit well with the biblical timescale. The current world population could have been produced from Noah's family, even if the population took 150 years to double, which is a very slow rate. The red line of this graph is from Robert Carter's model showing this slow doubling scenario. The current world population doubling time is only about 60 years, and in the 1960s the world population was doubling every 35 years. Of course, reduction in the rate can happen from pandemics, wars, famines, and so on. But the model that starts from the flood makes more sense than the evolutionary model, which says that the human population was much smaller for a very long time. One pushback that may come to mind is that many ancient artifacts have been dated by archaeologists to be before the time of the Bible that it shows for Noah's flood, around the mid-3rd millennium BC. Sometimes these are dated through carbon-14 dating or other radioisotope methods. Interestingly, there's a couple reasons to consider that carbon-14 dating would need to be adjusted around the time of the flood, due to the changes in carbon ratios and changes in Earth's magnetic field. And there's evidence also that some radioactive decay may have taken place more quickly during some periods in the past. I hope to make another video about these topics in the future, but for now you can check out the links in the supplement. So in summary, we've looked at a few samples of evidence for the global flood that the Bible talks about. And we've only skimmed the surface in this video, so check out the resources in the supplement for more.